Hey there, in this video, I'm going to talk about no indexing, robots.txt, and you as a software company or software as a service company, where I've been observing a lot of trends in recent months and years. And with the introduction of AI and LLMs, this is becoming a little bit more pervasive of a problem and want to provide several recommendations and best practices to consider. So the question is, why does this even matter, right? For unwanted content indexing, a lot of prevailing thoughts are like, hey, we need content, we need it indexed, we have a software website. What's the issue? Well, the problem is for software companies, especially where you have end user assets that are accessible at like a subdomain level or a software application that's running within like a subfolder of your website, this can create a lot of issues. One primarily is unwanted content polluting the search index. It could also create issues with understanding what content is worth prioritizing for your main sort of marketing focused website. And then also it creates canonicalization issues where search engines are simply confused as to what is the authority page or really subdomain across really a network of domains. And unwanted content and unwanted URLs kind of then gives rise to unwanted crawling. And generally, websites have a finite crawling budget from crawlers like Google and Bing, OpenAI. And those crawlers are intelligent. They want to focus on, they want to both be comprehensive, but also focus on what's important. If you have a lot of content that is out there, publicly accessible, you could be actually creating a lot of problems for yourself when it comes to crawling and making sure your web content is up to date. So, in short, why does this matter? At the end of the day, it impedes your organic search performance. Additionally, because of AI like ChatGPT, Perplexity, and so on, there's more considerations than simply Google and Bing search. With ChatGPT and Perplexity and Gemini and Claude, these systems try to do their own crawling or work with a partner service, essentially a proxy that's kind of like Google or Bing or another third party, which will then try to fetch your web page or content across your domain or your website. These AI LLMs also are known to hallucinate URLs. So it will literally make up URLs that it anticipates or it predicts is the next logical URL. So if you, for instance, are you're trying to look up how to log into a company or steps to configure an integration, those crawlers will attempt and just using their best guess and the corpus of knowledge that they already have to anticipate the next move that you are making across your website. And it will actually provide these URLs and bake these URLs into the instructions provided by users or provided to users. And this can kind of create a lot of scenarios. And if you check your logs, which by the way, I recommend you do, if you check your crawling logs and you check your user access logs, you're going to find a lot of 404s because of hallucinated URLs. So what you want to do is try to check around for that and see what types of URLs are they trying to access. Anyways, this goes, you know, part and parcel with essentially kind of maintaining your organic search performance, making sure you have a clean bill of health for your website and your client websites, especially when you're trying to access sensitive content. If you think about it like an email system or a landing page system, depending on kind of what's on the other side, that will actually kind of give you a little bit of direction as to how sensitive or how risky some of this might be. And you might already have security procedures and policies in place. This doesn't conflict with that. This just helps you kind of fine tune that on the organic search, organic web content accessibility. Speaking of security, there's absolutely a whole new world that's opening up with AI, which will basically kind of probe and poke around your website. These are basically bad actors who are looking and examining at your sitemap. They're examining your robots.txt files. they're monitoring your server responses, they're profiling your web server software, and they're just poking around at all times. And they might be coming from trusted networks, they might be coming from untrusted networks. So your organic search presence could give the security reachers unnecessary clues to help them in their research. There's search engines like Shodan and others that basically profile sort of endpoints that are freely accessible to the public web. So, what you want to do is obviously avoid any applications from appearing there unnecessarily. Lastly, just want to call out some attention to it is basically just general application performance. Essentially, these web crawlers, right? They don't consume zero resources. If your web application is dynamically generating content for every web access, that could be problematic, especially when crawlers can send numerous sessions, numerous requests simultaneously to a destination. A lot of AI LLMs are even more aggressive because they need to provide a instantaneous response for end users. So they will do parallel, and simultaneous requests on a web server in order to fetch resources and provide users what it believes to be as a real time answer. So it's important to implement sensible caching logic and routines there to make sure that you're not burning additional compute or memory resources just to serve these crawling attempts. And from my experience and working with a number of software companies, software engineers, this is kind of the least prioritized concern. They're always more focused, and as they should be, more on the front end and the back end, server performance. This is just always sort of a leftover kind of thought that you kind of eventually come back to when you have the convenience and the opportunity and the luxury to kind of optimize your code versus build something net new for the market. So, what are the solutions here? So you have a number of solutions in your toolbox. Generally, you want to use these, collaboratively in sort of a progressive way as it makes sense across your application. So you could carry out these improvements through simply no index tags. No index tags are good for traditional search engines like Google, Bing, there's not many others beyond that, to be honest, but it's basically those primary search engines are supposed to adhere to and obey no indexing directives. That could be done through an on page meta tag. You can also carry that out through an X robots tag in your response headers. Or my favorite is to doing both. You want to make sure that, if you don't leave any room for any doubt for any crawlers to be able to understand what is your intent and purpose of, for declaring your website that is open for crawling or not. So definitely that's option number one. Option number two is going to be employing proper robots.txt protocol. So basically ensuring that you are specifically advertising or disallowing certain crawlers or universally all of them to crawl across your website or not to crawl across your website. The only caveat here is that not all AI services obey this or even respect it. They even have specifically called out language that when an end user, let's say like ChatGPT, an end user might say, access this page and tell me what you think about it. That crawler will then attempt to access your page regardless of your robots.txt directives. So there's basically a next level of response that you need to be able to do to kind of harden your website from unwanted crawling. And again, this is kind of the spirit of SaaS companies where this is not for end user kind of content that you want to be seen by the masses. This is for content that you don't want to be seen. So you could employ a web application firewall. Cloudflare makes this very convenient to enable or disable, crawling activities across your website. They have some guidance when you're logged into Cloudflare for your firewall to basically block AI crawling in general across certain rules and directories and so forth. You can also do this at the web server level, which is also recommended. So if there's any sensitive parts of your application where you don't want any crawling or activity, make sure your server is responding with a 403 or a 410 response. 410 is specifically for content removal, but 403 is basically access denied. Make sure you respond to those accordingly so that when crawlers access it, they are being told in the transaction that they are not allowed. This is not permitted. They might still attempt to crawl. They might continue to fetch the page resources that it is provided and continue. But what you're doing is trying to limit access to anything that is deemed sensitive. And then likewise for end users, and you can also monitor this through user agents and so forth, that you are redirecting them to the appropriate destination. So maybe it's a deep link inside your application. You might want to do a 301 or even a 302 redirect to send them back to the login page, right? If they're not authenticated or they don't have the appropriate cookies, immediately direct them back to the login page. Don't render any other content, even with caching routines and so forth. Just immediately enforce that. So let's talk through a quick example. Basically, this is basically what I was alluding to, is that each mitigation method, is not one size fits all. It is tailored to each application and each specific scenario. It also depends on if you already have content out there that is getting indexed in search engines. And the way that you would know this is you would claim your domain on and verify your domain on Google Search Console or Bing Webmaster Tools, and you would observe and look at what domains are those services even crawling. You also need to monitor your server logs, access logs, and be able to parse out, what are the user agents and the IP networks and so forth that should be accessing and making sure that looks normal. It's good to assume that the crawlers may render JavaScript, but are not required to. Most will not render JavaScript, but some may. Also assume that they may come from trusted IP ranges. These are not necessarily site scanning type of network crawls coming out of North Korea. A lot of these are coming out of basically Google and Bing networks, OpenAI, Claude. They all have their you know prescribed IP ranges. So these wouldn't otherwise raise a red flag in your network firewall. These are working as designed, right, for crawling the modern web and the internet. So, depending on IP reputation is not at issue here. It's really just understanding that these crawlers are surfacing URLs and pages that you might not want to be surfacing to the public. And then assume that those crawlers, when they access a page and it's given a 200 response, that it will index and crawl every URL that you are serving it, whether those are absolute URLs or relative URLs or URLs that are rendering in pure JavaScript. These crawlers will try to access it and try to spider your entire website. That is exactly what they're designed to do. Um, they don't always listen to your requests. Even if you give them an access denied, it might still try to, pull in a link like a forgot password link, and then that will actually be indexed, later on. So just assume that all links to any sensitive app URLs are accessible and discoverable unless you actively prevent that. So, and like I said, monitor your server logs to make sure that the URLs that you want to be accessed are the ones being accessed. The ones that should not be accessed are not being even served in the first place. So here's the logic in trying to put all this together. So as a software application, you really have a few methods here that you need to do in sort of in order. So the first of which is essentially just assume that there's going to be some existing index or a source. It could be based on a user request. It could be crawling your website, accessing your sitemap.xml. It could be links, bookmarks. It could even be browser telemetry data. Google recently has been known to surface this data as a part of its ranking algorithms. There's not a definitive link, but there's definitely strong suggestions to know that browser telemetry data could be a data source for users basically informing Google and other analytics platforms to be aware of URLs that are publicly accessible. So just assume that all URLs may be accessible unless otherwise noted. So just from step one is basically there's a source that basically says go fetch this URL, go access it. So when the robots and really the crawlers out there, and for this example, just assume ChatGPT or Google. I'll describe kind of the differences between them. So, Google will try to first access that root domain's robots.txt file. If you have a subdomain, it's going to try to access the subdomain's robot.txt file. And in that robots.txt file, there's the robots standard that it's looking for is basically a set of allow rules and disallow rules, and it's going to basically be looking for that by user agent that's specifically geared for each crawler. And it has a certain set of criteria. It's a very public standard. It's been out there since 1999 or so. And essentially, the robots.txt rules basically are the first layer. But you want to keep this in mind. You don't want to stop here. If crawlers cannot access a URL, it does not mean it won't be indexed. You need to specifically allow robots.txt directives to permit the ability for the crawlers to understand what's on the other side. So we move on to the next stage here, which is let's assume the crawler can access the page. If the crawler can access the page, they can then determine if you have a no index directive. So if you have a no index directive, Google and Bing will honor that on the page level. It could also be done, via the X robots tag. Either way, the robots indexing directive is URL specific. So when a crawler accesses that URL, it will look for a no index or a no archive directive, and it will honor that accordingly. The exception here is ChatGPT and other AI LLMs. They do not follow, they do not understand what no indexing directives are. What they will mostly try to do is they will honor the robots.txt rules. So you basically have some different conditions for when you want crawlers to access your website. Generally speaking, you want Google and Bing to freely be able to access the pages on the other side. For AI platforms like ChatGPT slash OpenAI, Claude, Gemini, you name it, all these other LLMs that are out there, you don't want them to even have any indication that they're permitted to proceed. So this is kind of step one. It's intended for the for basically like the crawlers, right, to stop, like the AI LLMs to stop. This is for Google and Bing and modern, aka traditional search crawlers. You want them to access the pages, generally speaking. You want them to be able to access the page so they can read the indexing directive, whether that's a no index or a no archive. And then from there, if it meets their other criteria for URL quality, backlinks, descriptions, the content on the page, then it will be added to their more permanent search index, and it's queued up for prioritization. So on the other side here are basically solutions to help you through this, right? So in general, whenever you can, limit the deep links of unwanted app URLs to discourage the crawlers. If you have internal links to deep links across your website, let's just assume like a help center, append no follow on those links as an attribute. That'll it's only a suggestion. It's barely even a best practice, to be honest. But it's a suggestion to kind of encourage crawlers to limit attempting to crawl. But of course they may. Next is to apply no index directives on any publicly accessible unwanted URLs. Additionally, if you have other URLs that an end user, like your customers, are using, like let's just say for like landing pages, make use of the canonical URLs. So Any rules that are applied to that URL and any variations of that URL can be canonicalized to the one primary version of that page. So crawlers, especially modern ones like Google, will understand what your intended purpose is, even if there's query parameters or any other variants that are appended onto the URL itself. Make sure that you also apply the disallow rules in the robots.txt file for basically declared crawlers. Any modern AI platform and search platform will have a disclosure explaining what their crawler's user agent is and the rules that it follows. So you can always just double check that and Google for it, really. I'm sure you'll find it. And what you want to do is have the robots.txt file ordered in such a way where you have specific allowed directives and then ultimately get to a disallowed directive, especially if it applies to subdomains and other client URLs that should not be accessed through a traditional search interface. And then really the last layer of this is just making sure that you are enforcing like strict security rules depending on the types of URLs being accessed. So you could use like Cloudflare or your web server to respond accordingly with a 403 response, which is like an access issue, um, accordingly, and just say like like access denied. For end users, you could determine this probably based on the user agent, and to basically render a like a 301 redirect right to the login if they're not authenticated. There's probably established methods and practices there, so I don't mean to give wrong advice, but basically the whole point is you're stacking multiple mitigation strategies together to make sure that LLMs, AI LLMs, are only accessing and crawling the parts of your website that you want. Same for traditional search crawlers as well. And what you want to do is if you already have content that's indexed out there, you first need to focus on the no indexing um, directives here. Focus on that. Make sure all the URLs have the appropriate no index meta tag or xrobots tag. And make sure that that is effective and give that usually about a week or two within the traditional search interfaces to basically detect that. And these URLs will fall out of the search indexes. Once all that is out, again, to a level that you are satisfied with, it sometimes won't be 100%, but it'll be like 95% removed from the public searches, then you can actually implement a more restrictive robots.txt policy. This will be what's needed to prevent further indexing and crawling of the content. But if it does crawl, you're also backed up by the no indexing directive. So you kind of stack those together and you're going to be in a good position. You also want to make sure that the LLMs, specifically like ChatGPT and others, are not allowed in anything that is remotely non-public. Um, and basically you can also enforce that along with some web server or Cloudflare firewall rules as well. So it didn't used to be this complicated, in essence, for managing your public search visibility on organic search. Organic search used to primarily be, Google, Bing, Yahoo. If you remember back, Alta Vista. If you're following the Ahrefs project, the Yep.com, it used to not be this hard. Crawling was always rewarded and the best practice because that was what we wanted on the internet. However, some content indexing and crawling tools out there basically can surface content in an unwanted way and weaken your overall marketing posture for your software company. So the whole point here, at the end of the day, is to be super intentional with what content you are putting out there publicly, ensuring that it aligns with your expectations, user needs, and you're only putting out content if it's serving a purpose for your brand. So that's it. And feel free to drop any feedback or questions you have in the comments. Thanks.